Emerson probably put it best when he said, your actions speak so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying. I'd like to keep it that way. You don't know what that means?
You going to be a football player when you grow up?
Today is the best day of your life. Believe it.
Give me 8 years of daylight. That's all.
Greatest leader I've ever known.
What a ride it's been.
Football is kind of an interim between college and getting into your life's work.
You never did any endorsements. You never had a coach's show. You never went on to do anything on television. Are you ever going to write a book?
No.
Why not?
No, coaching is a very personal thing, and any correction has to be made subtly and quietly and not broadcast to the world.
We're here tonight to talk about the life and the legacy of Chuck Noll. We're going to bring up the author, Michael McCambridge, as well as 3 very special guests who know all about the Emperor Chaz. Michael, I'll start with you about this. What obstacles did you have?
It was difficult on a couple of levels because outwardly Chuck was not one of your more colorful characters. Also, Chuck was not the only member of his family who was private by nature. Talking about some of these things, talking about some of the obstacles Chuck had faced was painful for them at times, but I think they felt it was time for Chuck's story to be told.
For years, Chuck Noll's story had remained a closed book, despite the fact that his accomplishments spoke volumes. As head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he transformed a long-suffering franchise into one of sports' greatest dynasties.
Well, there's no doubt that Chuck created a new standard that didn't exist with the Steelers prior to him being here.
Pittsburgh, the Super Bowl champ.
He is the only head coach to go a perfect 4-0 in Super Bowls, winning the titles in an incredible 6-year span.
This well could be the best football team in history right now.
Whatever's right.
He is one of the winningest coaches of all time, guiding Pittsburgh to more than 200 victories over 23 seasons.
I rate Chuck Noll within the top 5 coaches that ever coached in the National Football League.
Yet throughout his life, and even after his death in 2014, the Hall of Fame coach remained a mystery. A man who revealed little of himself to the public or to his own players.
We respected him, for sure, but I don't know anything about him. None of us do. We sit back and just try to figure it out ourselves, even while we were playing. It was just strange.
He had this aura about him. They used to call him the Emperor. Well, you kind of felt like you were in the presence of football royalty. I mean, he was very, very intimidating, and he could just look at you and make you lose bladder control.
I don't know. I could imagine having a great time with Chuck. Not that I ever did. He was not a warm and cozy sort of guy.
He'd come around and he'd go, thank you. Are you okay? Nice game. It was like he read somewhere that you need to thank your players, for the job they did.
He believed that we shouldn't read the papers. He believed that we should treat the media like mushrooms, keep them in dark and feed them manure.
What about the Oakland-New England game? Did you watch any of that?
We saw part of it, yes.
And what were your impressions of Oakland's performance that day?
Well, it really doesn't matter what my impressions are. I usually don't make them public anyway.
I always said if Chuck had his way on Sunday after a game, he'd just pick up his briefcase, go home and drink a nice glass of wine and listen to classical music. No interviews, no other activity other than the game itself.
He was not a self-promoter. I mean, he did one advertisement in his entire time here.
I always had the feeling that, our players were in there for a very short time. And if there were any endorsements or anything, outside of football that was to be done, they should do it, because I was in there for the long haul, and I didn't need that outside stuff. I didn't need the endorsements. They did.
When it comes to keeping his feet...
While Noll's players became the game's most recognized names and faces, the coach could often be forgotten.
We've heard about Bud Grant and his sterling personality, but what is it, Chuck Knox?
Chuck Knox was the coach of the Los Angeles Rams.
How about Chuck Noll?
Chuck Noll is the guy.
That's a good one. One more time. We've heard about
Even into the 70s and 80s, he was still getting mail addressed to Chuck Knox. You would see newspaper headlines in which his name was misspelled, K-N-O-L-L, and this is even after he started winning Super Bowls.
He was a puzzle sometimes. I'd ask him questions, I'd get the same answers the reporters did. Frustrating. I was excited to read Michael's book because I'd learn more through the book than I would for living with him.
Here is one of the great coaches in professional football history, but yet, for whatever reason, he's not up on the Mount Rushmore with Lombardi and Halas and Shula and Landry. I do think he was a product of his time and his upbringing. He was born in Cleveland during the Depression to a relatively stoic German-American family. And this was America pre-Oprah, You didn't discuss your feelings. You didn't spend a lot of time wallowing in how does this feel for you? How does this feel for me? I love you was not something that was said a lot around the Noll household.
No, we weren't very emotional people, let's put it that way. I mean, we didn't go around hugging one another either and that stuff.
The Nolls rarely shared their feelings or their problems with the outside world.
We were in our junior year in high school, and all of a sudden I heard scuffling next to me, and Chuck fell out of his chair. And he was thrashing on the floor, and I jumped out of my seat, and I grabbed him because he was like pounding his head on the floor. And I tried to put my hand under his head. I was shocked.
What many of his friends didn't know was that Noll suffered from epilepsy. His occasional seizures would continue into early adulthood.
It had to be a constant worry that he knew that if he was going too long without taking these pills, he was going to have a problem. And I think that Chuck was hesitant in case something were to happen about going too many places unless he knew the people well. And that's, I think, one of the reasons he was so private.
Growing up in this very insular environment in which family was everything, he wasn't going to spend a lot of time being in touch with his feelings. And that's the man who became the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Chuck Noll would play a huge, huge role in my life and teach me so much about the game of football. I love Coach Noll as a coach because he was an instructor, and he taught you what to do and how to do it. And for me, that's what I thought coaching was all about. Everything that I put into practice as a head coach, really, I took from Coach Noll. Concentrate on those little things. In our first meeting, he said there was more to life than just football, and he wanted to help us find our life's work.
You have to remember football is kind of an interim between college and getting into your life's work.
Chuck Noll began seeking out his life's work at the University of Dayton.
His degrees were in education. He loved it. And if he hadn't been drafted by the Browns, he would have taught school.
Noll was selected by his hometown Cleveland Browns in the 20th round of the 1953 draft. He played 7 years as a linebacker and offensive guard under Hall of Fame coach Paul Brown. Brown's intellectual approach to coaching suited the cerebral Noll.
Cleveland coach Paul Brown sends guard Chuck Noll into the game with the play.
Paul Brown would remind his players, this is not what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. You need to be thinking about your life's work.
Chuck loves football. He knows football. He loves teaching. He knows teaching. And at the end of 1959, he settled on his life's work.
Noll's coaching career started as a defensive assistant for the Chargers in the new American Football League.
Coaches Walt Hackett, Chuck Noll plan the defense for the coming season.
He spent 6 seasons under Hall of Fame coach Sid Gilman
Here we go.
before joining Hall of Famer Don Shula's staff with the NFL's Baltimore Colts. As defensive coordinator, Noll helped build a suffocating defense, one that made the Colts overwhelming favorites over the Jets in Super Bowl III.
Start and get moving fast. The New York Jets are the world champions. They have upset the Baltimore Colts and beat them handily here today.
That was just a nightmare. It was really awful for him. I don't think he ever got over it.
Did he talk about it later in life?
No. We didn't talk about the ones we won either.
The next year, Noll became head coach in Pittsburgh, where he took over a franchise that had never won a postseason game.
Well, I think when you have a 37-year history of not good, it's going to take a little longer even then to work out of that because you're always bucking the heritage.
When he was hired, he said, I've been watching the game films, and I can tell you why you've been losing. You could have heard a pin drop in this room. And he said, the reason you've been losing is you're not any good. And I'm going to have to get rid of most of you. And we were, oh, my goodness.
The first week of training camp, I'm waiting for Chuck, and he pulled in and he said, come in the house. And I said, all right. And he said, you need to know this. Just prepare yourself. This is a terrible team. So it's going to be a very tough year, maybe longer. Just know it.
In 1969, the 37-year-old rookie head coach led the Steelers to a win on opening day. Pittsburgh then lost the remaining 13 games of the season.
It was a battle of passing attacks being only slightly more effective than an aerial attack in a 1935 Jock Sutherland offense. On the sideline, Coach Chuck Noll muttered something unprintable.
While the team struggled to find its footing, Noll remained grounded in the fundamentals.
I'll never forget, he took me and he said, when you're standing across from the tight end, I want you to move your right foot 2 inches wider and 1 inch back. I'm like, what? That's going to help me? Yes, trust me. And it did help. It made it harder to hook me.
Chuck was into which shoulder do you hit him with? What foot are you on when you hit him with? Where do your hips go after the hit? Where are your hands doing after the hit? See, that's what Chuck emphasized.
He would tell you that my job is to teach you how to play this game correctly. I will never give you a motivational speech. If I have to motivate you, I will fire you.
We played the Oilers every year, twice. And once at Three Rivers, someone on the Oilers left a playbook. And the clubhouse guys found and they brought it to Chuck. And in our meeting that we always have on Mondays, Chuck said, this is a playbook for the Houston Oilers. We have another game to play with those guys. And he said, you see this? Dropped it in the trash. And he said, it's not important what they do. The most important thing is what we do. He didn't care about bulletin board stuff. We didn't get involved in hyperbole. Plain language, we didn't get involved in bull.
Defensive tackle Joe Green was Noll's first draft pick in 1969 and would become the cornerstone of the franchise. The coach reshaped the roster, and as the talent improved, so did the win totals. By Noll's 4th season, Pittsburgh was a playoff team. Over Noll's first 6 seasons, the Steelers drafted 9 future Hall of Fame players, including one who would test the coach's patience as a teacher.
Chuck drafts Terry Bradshaw, and the Steelers get what every dynasty needs, which is a franchise quarterback, and Chuck gets what would become in the years ahead, his greatest coaching challenge.
Question for Mike, the author. Terry Bradshaw.
Yeah, I did over 300 interviews for this book, and the one person who did not want to talk to me was Terry Bradshaw. So it's clear that on Terry's side, there are still some hard feelings.
No, listen, I'm saying there's a lot of things. I'm talking to you. I will not talk about him after this interview, okay? I only am doing this because I feel like if it's important that I do it. I don't want to be negative on a man that I had so much respect for, but I'm letting you on the inside.
Roll 5.
The first time you ever met Chuck Noll, the Steelers coach, what did he say?
Coach Knowles? Actually, I met Coach Knowles when I came in the first time for the press conference. Talked to him for about 5 minutes, and that's it. I haven't spent a whole lot of time with Coach Knowles.
In 1970, Terry Bradshaw arrived in Pittsburgh, a raw rookie out of Shreveport, Louisiana.
I don't know why he drafted me. I never was his kind of guy. I'm cows and horses and dogs, and he was wine and Russian literature and stuff I have no clue. I didn't know anything about reading coverages. I did everything on the fly in college. I frustrated him. I was a kid that needed a pat on the back, not an ass chewing, and that's what Chuck did to me. He chewed my ass. He had a thing about putting his hands on me, and that was his control. And he grabbed my face mask and embarrassed the you-know-what out of me. And I think he thought he needed to be hard on me because I was a mama's boy, and hey, let's go out there and have a good time today, boy, you know, and to corral me and to focus me.
How would you describe your relationship with Terry?
Business-like. You know, it was all business. You know, I think you see a lot of Terry on TV right now. He's fun-loving, you know, kind of devil-may-care, and we couldn't have that in our quarterback. It had to be, you know, we got to get this done, and this is how we're going to do it. And I think it worked. You know, he may not have liked it, but it worked.
I feared the hell out of him. Like him? No, I didn't like him. Yeah, I couldn't stand him. He couldn't stand me, and I wish the hell he'd have traded me.
That situation was a one-way street. Chuck had no animosity towards Terry.
This is the irony of it all. Chuck, I thought he would treat every player the same. The only guy who I thought that he may have, you know, insulated some of the issues away was Bradshaw.
Terry did a good job in third down conversions.
Terry was the only guy where I thought, you know, Chuck just treats him just a little bit different. You know, I'll take some of the pressure off him. Rest of us be damned.
My take on it was that Chuck did everything he could to protect and help Terry be a positive and confident player on the football field. So I don't understand what the beef is about.
There's such a large part of me just wished he just reached out and hugged me one time. Maybe that's what. Maybe I'm one of those kids that wanted his daddy to say, I love you, you know, and I never got that. So I'm pissed.
Terry has said, I just wanted sometimes to get a hug.
Yeah. I didn't get many. He wasn't demonstrative of his affection. It was there, but he wasn't going to show it. You had to kind of perceive it.
Did I respect him? Absolutely. When I think about Chuck, he made me tough.
In 1974, Bradshaw helped lead the Steelers to the AFC Championship game. They would meet the Oakland Raiders, who had just beaten the two-time defending champion Dolphins in a thrilling divisional playoff.
In the post-game, John Madden of the Raiders made a comment to the effect of, that's what happens when the two best teams in football get together.
Oh, when he heard that quote, Chuck was furious. It was a genuine, how dare you kind of thing. And so he said it to his players.
And we were in the room like this, and Chuck was talking, and he said that, the people out in Oakland says that the best two teams played yesterday. And I want you guys to know that the best team in pro football is sitting right here in this room. And I'm sitting in one of these little chairs for, first graders. And I kind of rose up out of the chair without putting my feet on the ground. And that was the first time in, I think, my 6th year that Chuck ever said anything that resembled a locker room speech, a motivation thing. And that game, in my view, was won that day. No way they were going to win. They didn't have a chance.
In Super Bowl IX, the defense Noll had built smothered Minnesota. And the quarterback he had toughened sealed the win.
Here is Bradshaw rolling right and fires into the end zone, complete for the touchdown. Number one. Terry Bradshaw has had his greatest 3 games in a row when he had to have them in the playoffs. Chuck Noll being carried off. They were about the worst team in pro football when he took over. I would say their best years are ahead of them.
We're going to relax and enjoy it for just a short time, and then get on to next year.
And then be ready for next season. All ready?
That's right. It comes around fast.
The next season, Pittsburgh won its 2nd straight Super Bowl title.
I think the thing that helped me understand Chuck's view of the world was a comment that he made at one point, that at the end of a game or the end of a season, win or lose, he didn't exult. He felt as though somebody had stuck a pin in him.
Congratulations again, a great victory.
I think it's almost, he was depressed after winning the Super Bowl, all of them. I mean, you work so hard.
He was depressed?
You work so hard, and for him it was about the doing. He spent all season working toward this goal, and now what?
I don't know what I'm going to do. I have business to take care of at home, and then I'll find out, make plans. We've only got plans for tomorrow, which is to get on a plane and go back to Pittsburgh.
Was your father dull?
No, he wasn't dull. He was actually pretty entertaining. In a small family party, he'd be the one leading the party. He would almost never talk about football at home. I mean, for him, football was one part of his life, but it wasn't his life. He clearly separated the two. He wanted to make sure that home was home. He was dad at home. He wasn't a football coach at home.
We took the month of June off because he felt so strongly about time with Chris. We always knew that June was ours.
For Chuck Noll, family vacations weren't just a chance to get away. They were an opportunity to quench his lifelong thirst for knowledge.
We were first married. He was taking down some wallpaper, and he was not happy. So I said, I will read to you. So I sat on the floor, and I read to him. And it started something that lived with us for 50-odd years. And in all the years of our marriage, I read out loud to him.
More knowledge leads to more enjoyment, the more things that you're aware of. You have to be aware of something before you can enjoy it.
You know, he wanted to talk to me one time about the Battle of Gallipoli, because I was from Istanbul, Turkey.
Chuck gave me a lesson one day on Islam.
He didn't just learn about something, he wanted to master it. He got curious about wine, and he wanted to learn all about it.
I'm inclined to the Cabernets or the Bordeaux's from France. In California, 1970 was a great year.
Well, I heard he played the ukulele, And that surprised me.
Played the recorder, sang. He'd sing a lot of the traditional songs. Mountain Dew, you get a line, I get a pull.
I can remember being in training camp, and all of a sudden Chuck popped in. And so there was a guitar in the room. So he picks it up, and he starts playing it. I mean, like, not just plucking it, he was playing it and playing it very well. And he goes, oh, well, this is a very nice guitar. Okay, he sets it down. And, all right, see you guys.
And then he conducted the symphony. And it wasn't like some of those guys get up and symphony's conducting them. He was on in time, violins, and brought in the brass, you know.
Roll 2, Chuck Noll.
When we interviewed Chuck Noll, he would walk over and look at our camera equipment.
Brand new camera we just got.
One day he looked at me and said, "Is that an Airflex camera?"
It's this Airflex. What do you got, an Airflex?
Yeah. It's a new SR Airflex.
I had no idea. The guy was very knowledgeable about cinematography and photography.
We were doing photography. He knew all there was to know about photography.
He had a dark room in his home in Upper St. Clair, and also our team photographer had a dark room up at training camp at St. Vincent. And often at night, after he had the coaches' meetings, Chuck would go down with the photographer in the dark room and help him develop some of the photos. I mean, his curiosity about things was incredible.
He called me one day and he said, "Hi." I said, "What did you do?" And he said, "I bought an airplane. They're going to teach me to fly." It's okay.
You see the most interesting man in the world and the Renaissance man. I mean, they got the wrong guy. It's Chuck Noll.
Noll's willingness to try new things extended to his football team. Though the city still relished its reputation for fierce defense and a power running game, by 1978, Noll knew that the strength of the team lay elsewhere.
Our first two Super Bowls, our defense was dominant, and our offense was more like a goal line offense. Our offense picked up considerably. Our passing game was much better. It was not just a running game.
Noll unleashed his quarterback, who responded with an MVP season. Terry Bradshaw led Pittsburgh to Super Bowl 13, where he threw 4 touchdown passes and was named the game's MVP.
You know, I said one thing to our football team after the game, and I sincerely believe it. I don't think we've peaked yet. And we're looking forward to even bigger and better things.
Yeah. Congratulations. Back to you, Dick.
A year later, the Steelers returned to the Super Bowl as heavy favorites to win their 4th championship.
Hold it up. We got a 2-minute commercial before we go out, and they won't let us take the field. See? So that's one of those. Just hang it loose here a little bit. All right.
Noll maintained his calm, despite an unexpected halftime deficit.
One of my favorite memories is halftime when we were losing. He was jogging off, and he kind of jogged at the cameraman. And it was fun to see him do that. And I said, oh, that's my father. That's when I know, because that's who he was. It also showed a level of confidence that they were losing, but he was relaxed and he felt really good where they were.
In the 4th quarter, Noll would call the game's decisive play.
I'll go over to the sideline. Chuck says, look. He pushes the camera guy away, first of all.
4 and 5 call. Hey.
And Chuck put in this play, open right, 70 slot, hook and go. Ran it all week in practice, never completed it, hated it. He says, look, I know you don't like this play, but he says, we're only going to beat these guys by throwing the ball deep. I said, okay. So I trusted him.
Bradshaw pumping, firing downfield. There goes Stallworth. He pulls it in at the 30, the 20, the 10, the 5, and it's a touchdown for Pittsburgh.
So Chuck's play won us that football game. And couldn't have done that without both of us trusting one another, which I know I did, you know, and I'm sure he did too.
After our fourth Super Bowl, we hadn't even come home yet, and he said, "You need to get ready. We're old, and we're tired, and we haven't had high draft choices. We've got tough years ahead of us."
As the 1980s began, the pillars of the Steelers dynasty started to leave, often with little sentiment from their head coach.
Told Chuck I couldn't play. He said, okay. That was it.
I went in to, tell him I was going to retire, and he said, "That's good, and I wish you a lot of luck, and thanks." And that's it, which is so pure Chuck.
He kept the distance because he felt he had to. That's the only way he could be objective. I think he was extraordinarily fond of a lot of his players that perhaps they didn't know it.
I'm going to leave here as a man.
Replacing his aging veterans would prove difficult. Still, Chuck Noll guided the Steelers 3 straight playoff seasons in the early 80s, going as far as the AFC Championship game in 1984. But starting in 1985, the Steelers missed the postseason in 4 consecutive years. And the division the stoic Noll once dominated now featured a new generation of flamboyant head coaches.
I think he looked down on those kinds of people. These were, guys coming in, shooting off their mouth. They hadn't won anything to kind of earn his respect.
He didn't like Glanville because Glanville was a showboat. He was always boasting.
How about when we play Pittsburgh here, the day after that game, when we play, we'll have a Chuck Noll lookalike. And the winner will put up here and we'll throw eggs at him. How's that sound?
That was totally antithesis of Chuck. Chuck just did his job. He just despised Glanville.
In 1987, the unflappable Noll boiled over.
They played hard. They played on the borderline dirty. And then he started hitting us late, and they were doing cheap shots. When they crossed the line, Chuck wouldn't put up with it.
Well, that's when he went across the field. And that was from me to you when it happened. Because Chuck went over and grabbed him and said,
That's just not behavior you saw from Coach Noll. But, he was a tough guy. I really thought Chuck was going to punch Glanville.
I respected him. I would never argue with him in the middle of the field. He's too great a man, too great a coach. But we'd put a burr under his saddle. Be able to have a guy like that so mad at you can't wait to play, that's an honor that he thought that much of us.
In 1988, the Steelers hit rock bottom. They would go 5-11, Noll's worst record since his first season.
The Steelers have had, 6 punts blocked this year? Yoy, it's a National Football League record.
Embarrassing for you, Coach? Embarrassing, yes. It looks like we've never had a day of practice. It was the worst exhibition of football that I've seen in a long time, but we'd have trouble with the grade school team. What we have to do is donate our salaries because that wasn't professional football.
You get the first sense of doubters.
There was a sense that the Sharks were circling the water and that the game had passed him by.
What would determine whether or not you decided you should come back again? Would there be something so bad?
I won't even answer that question. All right?
Pressure further intensified when the Steelers opened 1989 with the worst defeat in franchise history.
Ball taken away from him. Here they come in, going into the end zone. It has been disastrous.
The next week, they were blown out again by another division rival. But Noll rallied his team, and the Steelers won 5 of their last 6 games to clinch a playoff berth.
Here they go, the Oilers versus the Steelers in the AFC wildcard game. There's bad blood between these teams and bad blood between Coach Chuck Noll and Coach Jerry Glanville.
One of the NFL's great grudge matches would be settled in overtime.
Just inside the 41. The ball is down. Gary Anderson kicks it. It is good. Gary Anderson kicks it from 50 yards. And the Steelers win it in overtime. The Oilers are throwing themselves on the field.
Delton Hall, for some reason, decides we've just won the Super Bowl, and he's trying to pick Chuck Noll up. Delton's around his leg, and Chuck's hitting him. Chuck always kept everything in great perspective. See, nobody's getting carried off here. It's one game. We got a few more games before we start carrying coaches off.
We knew deep down inside that he'd like nothing more to come in here and beat Houston, especially with Glanville being a coach. I know him and Glanville aren't the best friends, so that's one for Chuck.
It would be the final postseason win of Noll's career.
I think it was one of the best coaching jobs for a single season in the history of professional football, because you had a team that was not terrifically talented, coming off a very difficult season. He got so much out of that team.
By the early 90s, Chuck Noll's life's work in coaching was drawing to a close.
91, we knew going into the last few games that that was going to be it. You could just tell.
There was a different energy the last 2 weeks. There was a different energy with him, that intensity that was always there. It wasn't there.
At the end, they told my mother, this is a Super Bowl game, but I'm just too tired. You know, I'm done. And I think that was the end of the season. He just said, I can't do it anymore.
He just said, it's time.
There he is, the Emperor.
Is this Coach Chuck Noll's final game as coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers?
On the final Sunday of the 1991 regular season, Noll coached his Steelers to victory over the team he once played for, the Cleveland Browns.
He wanted this one badly, and Chuck Noll has a winning day, and this the conclusion of his 23rd season. Is it his last?
After 39 years in it, I have to step back and see what the flowers smell like for a little bit.
It was time to retire. You know, his line, time to get off my life's work.
Since you've been doing your life's work, what comes after life's work?
That's the major question, $64,000 question.
For him, it was kind of a bittersweet, yes, I'm done, but
Chuck, thanks a lot.
again, he always looked forward. So now what's next? He hadn't been free in the fall since 8th grade, you know? And so it was really a time of excitement for us.
True to his nature, Noll kept a low profile in retirement, making only the occasional public appearance.
We didn't have too long before all the other things kicked in, all his physical problems.
He had gone on vacation. I can remember being frustrated because he was forgetting things that were really obvious.
Eventually, Noll was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
I was saddened to see him. Not healthy.
Something like that.
I still read aloud. I read articles like out of the Smithsonian that I could read in one sitting rather than books. I read constantly for hours and hours. We did it to the end. And the night that he died, he helped me fix dinner, picked out the wine, picked out the music, we had a lovely dinner. He went to bed, and I went back to check him about an hour later, and he was gone. It was a beautiful mass and dignified, the whole thing, which suited him. There was so much dignity about him. There was so much honesty. His never-ending, never-ceasing curiosity about life and about people, I thought it was so amazing.
He's had such a lasting legacy on us. You saw what it meant to be a good husband. You saw him, the way he adored Marianne and the way he treated her. And you know, it was like, wow, okay, that's what you do. There were lessons in life, not just football, that have impacted me to this day.
Without Chuck, my time as a Pittsburgh Steeler would not have been nearly as enjoyable or successful. I just believe that it wouldn't have happened without him. So, for me, he gets all the credit.
He was the greatest man I ever met. He was the greatest teacher and the greatest leader. He is so instrumental in my life in so many ways, not just inside the white lines. Me as a parent, you know, me as a person.
And if there's a legacy, you know, it's that Chuck touched each and every one of his players. He made a difference in people's lives.
Some would say Chuck Noll made a difference for an entire city.
I mean, you got to understand, the Steelers, they were born in '33, and until Chuck came along, 0 playoff wins. Chuck comes along, boom, one of the great dynasties in sports history.
I don't think he ever has gotten or gets the credit for being one of the top 3 or 4 coaches in the history of the NFL. You know, maybe he wasn't exciting enough, maybe we weren't flamboyant enough, but we won, and that's what you're supposed to do.
This very private man in this very, very public job managed to transform not just a franchise, but I think a case can be made that Chuck Noll helped change the way that Pittsburgh saw itself. And at a time when the steel industry was buckling and the region was on the ropes, it's difficult to overstate just how important that was in that chapter of the history of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Is he not mentioned in the same breath these days as Vince Lombardi or Tom Landry? No, he's not. Would he be okay with that? I think he probably would. If you look at the measure of Chuck Noll's life, you find a man who overcame a lot and found his life's love and found his life's work. And at the end of the day, I don't see how you can read that life as anything other than a happy story.